Good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone joining us today. My name is Jessica Taylor, and I'm here at the Canadian Centre for Evidence-Based Conservation in Ottawa, Canada. We are located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. On behalf of the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence, I'd like to welcome you all to our April session of the Environmental Evidence Summit webinar series. This session, Advances in Agricultural Evidence, will be chaired by Nicola Randa of Harper Adams University. So to get things started, I will hand it over to you, Nicola. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much for that, Jess, and welcome everybody to our session. I think in a moment, Jess is going to show my screen, so that's fine. So I'm just waiting for that. Okay, so welcome everybody to our session, and our sessions on advances in agricultural evidence. But what I'm going to talk about is innovations in agricultural evidence, to introduce that and to just discuss some of the reasons why we might want to improve the scale, efficiency and accessibility of agricultural evidence. And then some of our speakers are going to talk about some of the ways in which we can do that. Okay, so agriculture faces a number of challenges. We need to become more efficient and, sorry, just bear with me. I've got, it's over my screen. Sorry, I can't see all of my screen, but hopefully I know what I'm talking about anyway. So agriculture needs to become more productive, efficient and environmentally sustainable to feed our growing global population. However, we need to use the best available evidence in order to inform any changes in agricultural practice. And this is a really rapidly developing area, so evidence collation and synthesis is growing in agricultural science. Yet it still lags behind other sectors, particularly that of healthcare. Evidence syntheses are very diverse in our field as well, so they can fall under the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence, Campbell or Cochrane evidence libraries, and this can make it appear a little bit disjointed. And the other issue is that end users may not understand or be able to access the evidence, yet they need that information to make their informed decisions. So there are a lot of opportunities though. There are some really exciting innovations taking place within the field of agricultural evidence, and we've got some people talking about some of those today. And a concerted approach might help to scale that work up and to begin to tackle some of the challenges that we've got. So where are we now with evidence in agriculture? Well, if you look in the literature, you can see people saying we need more evidence in agriculture. But in actual fact, I think a lot of the time we do have that. It's just a case of knowing what we've got. So there are all these different exciting innovations taking place. So agricultural evidence, if we're thinking about evidence syntheses, agricultural evidence is often in different places. So the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence, I've already mentioned, and that's probably where you'd find the bulk of typical agricultural reviews, as in reviews that take place within farmland or interventions which take place within farmland. But we also see social science development reviews relating to agriculture, particularly on the Campbell collaboration. And of course, there's the interface between nutrition and other things that go on farmland as well, which might be in the Cochrane Library. So the aims of our work have been to investigate ways in which to increase the scale of reliable evidence in agriculture, to improve the cost effectiveness and efficiency of evidence reviews in agriculture, and to improve the accessibility of agricultural evidence. And in order to try to address these aims, we've been getting people together to discuss them and look at how we can address them. So we first considered them as a group of people in a workshop which was held in September 2019, but then we've had lots of online discussions going on since. So in the workshop, we identified 6 different challenges or problem statements. So problem number 1, there's a fragmentation of people and projects in agricultural knowledge and its synthesis, which I've already mentioned. Number 2, the approaches and terminologies and methodologies that are used aren't always standardized across the different fields and people working in the area. Number 3, evidence synthesis is often considered separately from wider knowledge synthesis, but it really needs to be integrated. Number 4, there's a lack of understanding and engagement with evidence syntheses. Often people don't even know what they are. Number 5 is communication of outputs. It's often inadequate for target audiences. And number 6 is that funding is often uncoordinated and short-term, which can then impact on capacity, but also on continuity. So subsequent to the workshop, we turned these statements around into priorities for action. So our priorities became to reduce fragmentation, enhance coordination and longevity of funding, improve standardization of evidence, better integrate evidence, improve understanding and engagement with evidence syntheses, and ensure communication of outputs is made relevant to target audiences. And we used a consensus process to look at these and see how we could develop them and how we could try to achieve these priorities. And it's really the key message that's coming out is that we need to build capacity in order to develop and support our evidence communities. And to build capacity, there's a number of specific actions that we can take place. So sharing with each other rather than working alone. Looking at methods that exist, producing new methods, adapting methods and testing them for different audiences. And the same with standards, outputs, engagement methods, etc. Provision of training and guidance so that we can all be working to a more common goal and get more people involved. And of course, to learn from other disciplines. We shouldn't be working alone, just in agriculture. And there's lots of good initiatives that are already taking place. So for example, the Evidence for Farming initiative, we'll hear a little bit about today. That's talking about the creation of a What Works Centre for agriculture. The Campbell collaboration are creating a food security group. Of course, food security and agriculture really link together. Can we even separate them? We have areas where we're trying to create places where people can lodge systematic reviews that perhaps don't fall typically within the 3 areas that we've already talked about. We have people working on trying to get the public and get people working in farming thinking about whether or not they can be confident in evidence. Can they believe things that people they're saying to them? And what should they question? And the centre that I manage, the Centre for Evidence-Based Agriculture, is a systematic reviewing and evidence synthesis centre in the field of agriculture and land and food production. There's also really good tools available that aren't specific to agriculture, and there's just too many to mention, but I've just picked out one here. So the CEDA, the CEE database of evidence reviews, has 45% of its reviews are classified as agricultural. And you can see, and what this does is it tells us how confident we can be in different reviews. Where there's red areas, it shows that perhaps some of them are using methods that are less valid or less stringent than they could be. And so we can use this both to help us understand whether or not we can be confident in reviews, but also to learn lessons to make our reviews better in the future. And of course, the most important part of building capacity is the people and getting people involved. And we've got some of these people talking today, and I'm really excited to be working with the people that you're here talking to you today. But also, we'd like to hear more about what you're doing and get more people involved, people that perhaps we haven't engaged with because we don't know about you. So if you want to hear more about the opportunities and potential network building that we're working on, please do get in touch with me, and my email address is at the bottom there. And finally, I just want to thank a couple of people. Thanks to Cabby for providing funding to the workshop, which has started this engagement and this network building that that's starting to take place, but also to a variety of people, and I've named people here at the bottom of this slide. So that's really all I want to say. Just think about what the issues are, where we can go with it, and where we could be in 5 years' time, and introduce some of the people that are really going to help us get there, I think. Thank you. So our next speaker then.
Sorry, Nikki, if I may, there's just a question for you.
Ah, right, okay, yeah, because I've had my slides up, so I haven't seen the questions yet. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, so we have a question from Jacob from Africa, who's asking, how can we use evidence to enhance agricultural?
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. That's a really good question. And one of the issues we do have is that that a lot of the work that's taking place is taking place in the US and in Europe. Now, there are good evidence centres in agriculture. So the Agriculture Centre for Evidence, which is at the University of Johannesburg, is a good one to get in touch with, and they work across the whole evidence field, not just agriculture, but they could talk to you about getting involved. But likewise, if we can get more people involved from African countries and other parts of the world as well that we're less involved with, then I think we can really help use agricultural evidence to help enhance agricultural output. Because one of the issues at the moment is for people to be able to access that evidence. So do get in touch, Jacob, anyway, and I can put you on to some of those people that might be relevant. Okay, so I think that's it for questions. So Jess, could we move on to the next speaker, which is Claudia, and I will introduce Claudia. So our first speaker is Claudia De Bene, and she's a researcher in agronomy and soil science at the Council for Agricultural Research and Economics at the Research Centre for Agricultural Environment in Rome. And she's involved in various EU-funded research projects on agricultural soils, cropping systems, diversification and climate change. And she's going to be talking to us about some work that's come out of one of those projects on publication bias in agriculture. Thanks, Claudia.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicola, for inviting me to participate today in the webinar, and thanks also to Jess for the organization. This presentation is a part of the research activity ongoing in Klimasoma project within the Horizon 2020 European Joint Programme focused on agricultural soils and climate-smart sustainable management. I have a problem to go to the next slide. Okay. So Climasoma is a 1-year small synthesis project started last February, and 5 partners are involved in the activities, and more details are reported in the link on the right. The project aims to collect existing scientific literature and databases to quantify the relationship between agricultural management and soil functions in the framework of adaptive capacity and the resilience of cropping systems to climate change. We developed a specific task to estimate the impact of publication bias in our field study, and that's why we organized an exploratory survey to be used as input to identify the impacts of publication bias on meta-analysis. Next slide. Yeah. I have a problem to move to. Just can you help me because I can? Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So, what is publication bias? So studies with positive findings are more likely to be published and are published more quickly than studies with negative results or not statistically significant results. This phenomenon is a widespread problem that may seriously affect the interpretation of scientific research and findings. And omitting unpublished studies or grey literature from a review could lead to biased conclusions by missing important adverse effects and to overestimate the effect size of a given factor in meta-analysis and synthesis. There are at least 3 levels in which publication bias occurs, so submission process, review process, and editorial decisions. Here, we go more in depth about publication bias in agroenvironmental research. Although issues of publication bias have been deeply investigated in clinical studies for more than 4 decades, in an agroenvironmental field, it is a more recent phenomenon. Here, I have selected some key papers for assessing the effect of publication bias in agroenvironmental studies. So we remain focused on testing and adjusting for publication bias, assessment of the quality of meta-analysis in agronomy, or does size matter, a critical review of meta-analysis in agronomy. In this slide, we present how can publication bias be tested. So the methods most commonly used are agar test, funnel plot, and fail-safe number of unpublished studies. Here I reported an example of funnel plots. So studies are plotted on a graph illustrating the relationship between effect size and its variance. If the small size scale negative studies missed, we may have publication bias. So as I've mentioned before, as part of Climasoma activity, we have organized an exploratory survey aimed at identifying possible causes of scientific publication bias in agroenvironmental studies and soil science. The survey was organized in 3 main parts: respondent characteristics, identification of the main causes of publication bias that may have affect research activity, so related to peer review, publication, published datasets, grey literature, and unpublished datasets. And the final part is a final remarks about respondents. So the survey was sent to participants of the EJP soil program involved more in soil science and agroenvironmental activities, and 34 participants completed the survey. Age group and gender were balanced, while country of residence is more South and Northwest Europe oriented, with Italy, Finland, and Belgium as the most important countries represented. More than 90% of The participants working in research institutions. Their background is more related to agriculture and natural science, with a research specialization in pedology, soil crop modeling, agronomy, and soil ecology. So here we are going to identification of main causes of publication bias that may have affected research activities, focusing on the respondent perception. So regarding peer-reviewed publication, 85% of the respondents think that the impact of publication bias on agroecological and agricultural studies and soil science is moderate to high. And in the survey, they highlighted that the main causes are related to overstated results and unreplicable results. Few others reported that explanation departing from accepted paradigms and data not shared. I have problem to the next slide. I can't. I can go. And Jess, can you help me, please?
You should be able to click in the bottom left. I think there should be arrows that come up.
No.
Or use your keys. However,
yeah.
Yeah. So there, I think there's like and the small arrow. Your mouse is just around it.
Sorry. Yeah, perfect. So regarding peer review publication, main difficulties encountered in the review process are related to not significant discordant results. Editorial reviews impose their own opinion, and also fluency in written English can be also an issue that may cause publication bias. The main barriers to a fair evaluation are reported to be reviewers asked to use statistical methods they well known, confirmatory results are less evaluated than innovative one, and the review process is too demanding. Other factors that can increase publication bias are related to policy of the institution, non-Western world, or gender gap in authorship, developing countries, and others are related to low H index and notoriety of authors influence the chance for publication in journals with high impact factor, and limited time money to pick up for the results can also influence publications. Gray literature refers to the documents not controlled by commercial publishers and produced in print and electronic formats by government, academia, business, and industry. It mainly includes dissertation, project reports, conference abstracts, and books and other type of publication. And they are accessible mainly on the internet or by requesting them directly to the authors and research institution or funding agency. Regarding published data sets, the respondents agreed to publish interesting and significant data, so 76% of answers agree with this affirmation and fulfilling the selective criteria for publication in peer-reviewed journals. So the type of data published by respondents are mainly related to experimental studies, soil crop data measuring and modeling, and geophysical data and digital soil mapping. Regarding unpublished data sets, we have asked to identify the main reasons limiting data analysis and the main reasons causing manuscript rejection or limiting the publication of analyzed data. So regarding main reason limiting data analysis, inappropriate sampling strategies affecting the quality of data collected, the analysis of poor quality data would be uninformative, and data are not analyzed because the project is finished, or data are analyzed but a further analysis with alternative statistical techniques would be necessary for a better assessment of the results. Regarding main reason causing manuscript rejection, one is that the confirmatory results are generally not appreciated by peer-reviewed journals. Interdisciplinary research generally does not fit into specialized results, and the results diverging from mainstream scientific models are difficult to publish. So regarding repository, all participants to the survey agree that a repository of unpublished agroenvironmental datasets would allow to consistently expand the knowledge and incorporate not significant results in meta-analysis. So it's important to share the datasets and also to make quality checked GRI data available will bring us a step further to do multiple site analysis, so also considering pedoclimatic management ecosystem gradients. So all these objectives are feasible provided that the rules for data sharing are clearly stated, and above all, that the owners of the data are recognized for sharing because they do the hard and the work and expensive work. So in conclusion, despite the small sample size of respondents, the survey highlighted important issues related to publication bias. So publication bias has a moderate high impact in agroenvironmental science. Results that are negative, not statistically significant, have difficulties to be published, and publication bias can be reduced by considering all potential biases when discussing the findings, or by reconsider search strategies such as include grey literature in the search process, and also provide a repository of unpublished datasets for sharing data, and wait for more studies and redo systematic review. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that, Claudia. We're slightly over on time and we haven't got any questions in the chat at the moment. So I think if it's okay with you, we'll move on to the next speaker. And then if anybody's got any questions, we can address it in the panel discussion at the end.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes.
So, yeah. So our next speaker then, who I would like to introduce, is Solange De Bene. And Solange is a senior scientist at Cochrane, South Africa. She's also on the South African Medical Research Council and co-director of Cochrane Nutrition and of Cochrane Africa. So Solange is going to be talking to us about evidence syntheses to address the challenges at the intersection of health, nutrition and agriculture. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's really important that we don't just think about agriculture purely as on-farm food production, but we think about wider food security relating to agriculture when we're thinking about evidence. So welcome, Solange.
Thank you so much. I'm just checking if you can hear me and if you can see my slide clearly.
Yes, we can see your slides.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And thanks for the opportunity to speak today on this webinar. So you've already mentioned the title of our presentation. So let me just try to move on. Okay. So I'm really just going to provide a brief background to the presentation and discuss then some challenges that our team has faced when conducting a couple of Cochrane reviews, and some approaches that we've used to address those, and then finish with some concluding remarks. I think we can all agree that a lot of the problems that we face in the world today, be them health or socioeconomic development or environmental, are interconnected. And for example, if we take the case of food and nutrition security, as was mentioned earlier, it doesn't just depend on knowing what food to eat. It depends on a lot of other factors. It depends on what the agriculture and food system of a particular context are. It depends on culture, socioeconomic status, and so on. So really, what we need to address these issues is a multi-sectorial approach. Not a single approach is going to help us solve these problems. So we know we need complex multi-sectoral approaches or interventions, but then how do we select which one we implement? This is where we come to evidence-informed decision-making, which is underpinned by the best evidence and using that evidence to inform our decisions. Also acknowledging that evidence-informed decision-making doesn't just rely on evidence, but also on other factors, such as values and preferences of the population, any resource constraints, and even the context, and in the case of health interventions, the health system where they're being implemented. But going back to the evidence, this is a key concept that underpins the concept of evidence-informed decision-making. And here we're mostly talking about, or usually talking about, high-quality evidence synthesis of the best available evidence and drawing on that to inform our decisions. However, doing reviews or synthesis of these types of complex questions is often not easy. And also, as Nicola alluded to in her presentation, if we're doing reviews or questions that cross sectors, there's often some disparity because across sectors, the evidence tends to remain fractured because of methodological and conceptual differences in research and practice that exist. So what we'd like to do in this presentation is just briefly share our experiences with conducting systematic reviews that address multi-sectoral topics, albeit they are from a health perspective that can be useful to other reviews as well in terms of what challenges we've come across and how we manage them. So we're going to draw on examples from our team's conduct of 2 reviews. So these are Cochrane Reviews. And I'm just going to briefly just outline what the reviews were about. So the first one included population groups in LMICs and assessed community-level interventions that aim to improve access to food. And these included conditional and unconditional cash transfers, income generation interventions, food vouchers and rebates, and also village savings and loans. And these were compared to no intervention or a weaker intervention. And a variety of outcomes were measured in terms ranging from food security, diet diversity, anthropometry, and so on. It also included a variety of study designs, so from trials to control before and after studies and cohorts. Just to highlight that the category of intervention looking at income generation also included some agriculture-related interventions that had as a main aim to increase the income of households in the studies. The second review we're drawing on included infants and children, pregnant and lactating women from LMICs, and assessed agricultural and nutritional education interventions, alone or a combination of these, of any duration that aim to reduce aflatoxin exposure at the household and community levels during the post-harvest period, compared to no intervention, a waiting list control, or usual support. The primary outcomes of this review were prenatal and postnatal growth outcomes, and it included only trials, individual and cluster level randomized trials. So the steps of conducting a systematic review are pretty well known, and they start from defining your question, then planning your eligibility criteria, planning your methods, searching for studies, then applying the criteria to determine which studies would be included in your review, then collecting data and assessing the risk of bias on those included studies, and finally analyzing and presenting your results and interpreting those results and drawing conclusions, and perhaps at a later date update the review. So what we've done is we've highlighted some of the challenges that we faced in these 2 reviews linked to particular steps of conducting a systematic review. And these challenges are not limited to nutrition or limited to these specific reviews, but would apply to any reviews looking to address complex questions. So in terms of planning the eligibility criteria, one of the challenges is being able to clearly articulate what the question is and what the eligibility criteria is. So the PICO is what we refer to as the population, intervention, comparator, and outcome of interest. So in Access to Food review, we had started with a very broad question about interventions to increase food security, which was too broad. And what we proceeded to do was a scoping of the existing literature and of the existing systematic reviews addressing that question. in order to try to identify what the gap was in the evidence base that our review could address. And that's how we ended up then focusing more on interventions to increase access to food, because back then that was the gap that we identified through the literature scoping. Something else that can be very useful, and that was very useful to us, was developing a logic model or framework that illustrates or that highlights what the different intervention components are that you're interested in, and what are the pathways from the intervention to the outcomes of interest. This can be a really useful tool to clarify your question, your eligibility criteria, and to make sure you know that when you come across a relevant eligible study, you can clearly identify it. Also, in terms of eligibility criteria, one challenge is that often RCTs are not appropriate or feasible to answer the questions that we have. And so this is why in the Access to Food review, we did include other study designs, particularly control before and after studies and cohort studies. We also had planned to include ITS studies, but we couldn't find any. But it becomes really important to include other study designs that can also answer your question. In terms of searching for studies, one of the challenges is that if you search the standard databases, you may not find all the relevant, potentially relevant studies to be included in your review. And our approach for the Access to Food review is to have a really broad, comprehensive search strategy. So we searched across 16 different databases, because not only we wanted to make sure that we would find all the studies reporting interventions of interest to us. So, for example, we had to search Agris and Agricola databases, but we also wanted to make sure that we were finding studies that were conducted in low and middle income countries. So we had to really have a broad, extensive search strategy, even though that can come with certain drawbacks, such as having a lot of results yielded that we need to then screen. In terms of analyzing and presenting the results, a very common challenge is high levels of heterogeneity, both statistical and clinical heterogeneity. So in terms of the populations and interventions that are included in the review. And one approach to deal with this is really to try to be as clear as possible when you describe the interventions included in the review, because really understanding this enables the analyses to be planned properly, and also increases the usability of a review. One of the tools that can be used for this is the Tidier Template, which is a template of intervention description and replication. And this is an example from the aflatoxin review of what a Tidier table would look like, where interventions are each intervention included in the review are described in terms of why they were done, what materials and procedures were done, who, what, when, where the intervention was implemented, and how they maintained fidelity, and so on. Another challenge in analyzing and presenting results, and because of the high heterogeneity, and particularly because we see a lot of different types of outcome measures relating to the same domains being reported in reviews, is that then we often can't do meta-analyses. And one approach that we took for the Access to Food review is that we tried to use different kinds of methods to synthesize the data. We were able to do some subsample of some meta-analyses for subsamples of studies, but our broad synthesis method just followed new guidance from the SWIM guidance, which has now been incorporated into the updated Cochrane handbook. And so what we did was we synthesized according to direction of effect, and we developed these harvest plots to illustrate which studies were reporting outcomes falling into different categories of effect direction. So there are just different ways that can be synthesized besides this one that could be used when meta-analyses are not possible. So in conclusion, reviews addressing these important complex questions are feasible, can be very informative, even if you can't meta-analyze. The methods are not perfect and there are many challenges, but they keep evolving, and with innovation, I think they will keep becoming better. And also learning from other fields and sectors and how reviews are done in different fields can be very important. Thank you so much. And I'll just leave this here in case anyone wants to get in touch with us.
Thank you very much for that. That was really interesting and useful to see how you're doing things in Cochrane when a lot of the pure agricultural reviews are carried out in CEE. So it's really nice to see, you know, that the challenges are really the same. Similar. So again, we haven't got any specific questions at the moment and we are slightly over on time. So if it's all right with you, I'll do the same as for Claudia and move on to the next speaker and then give people the opportunity to ask questions in the panel discussion at the end, if that's okay.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you very much. But for those of you that are listening, please do feel free to pop questions into the chat and then we can address them in between talks if we would like to. Okay, so our next speaker is Jaron Portiello, and she's the Associate Director for Research and Data Engagement in the Department of Global Development and the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Cornell. And Jaron is the primary investigator and co-director for CERES 2030, a project which has been taking place over the last 3 years and over multiple institutions. And she's going to be talking about that along with machine learning, because she's also the PI for agriculture in the digital age. So she'll be able to, so she's talking about how she's introduced that into the CERES 2030 project, I believe. So welcome, Jaron, and thank you very much for speaking today.
Thanks, Nicola. I just want to make sure, can you hear me okay and see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, so thanks again. And many thanks, Nicola, for pulling the workshop together in September 2019 and for convening the panel here today. So as Nicola mentioned, I'm an information and data scientist at Cornell. I've been based in international agriculture for the past 10 years in a variety of different kinds of spaces and domains. And one of the challenges that I think has been really nicely highlighted by my co-panelists already today is kind of the distributed nature of research that we have in agriculture. And what I'd like to focus on today is kind of 2 use cases where I think that, you know, having AI and data science tools kind of working in the background can make a difference in terms of trying to create better understanding, not only of the evidence that we have in front of us, but how we bring these things together in a more analytical framework. So those are the points that I'd like to kind of pick up on here today. And just, I'll go very quickly over this slide because I think my co-panelists have really laid out the issues described here very well. But just to say that, you know, we do have a problem of kind of a scattered evidence base, and to the extent that this is shared in other disciplines, it's difficult for me to say since I've, you know, really focused most of my work here in agriculture and food security. But it is true that we have really great primary research that is not published in peer review literature and therefore not captured by many of our subscription and aggregated databases. So really important repositories, such as the CG research repositories, FAO, World Bank, have important primary research that is useful for evidence synthesis. And how do we capture that? I think as my colleague just pointed out in the previous presentation, it's often a matter of going repository by repository, and that is extremely time consuming for a number of reasons. In addition, one thing that we, you know, I think we talk about, but is difficult to kind of get a focus here is on the interdisciplinary expertise that's needed for food security and for agriculture. So in order to really think, you know, clearly coherently about all of the different methods and the different underlying research, we need to have people coming together, not just from crop and soil sciences and from breeding programs, but also our geographers and social scientists and economists, really all working together. And this is one area where I know science policy has really not kind of focused a lot of attention, is on how are we ensuring that interdisciplinary groups can cohesively come together, understand common ground, and move forward. in a really sort of responsive way. What are the methods that we have available for us to do that work? And then the last two, I think, have been really well communicated by my panelists, so I won't spend too much time on those. But just to say that I think that these key challenges are known and they've been discussed for a while. But I was really pleased last year that CABI Research Organization took the lead on organizing a survey to kind of share out with the community to get a little bit more information about what are some of the additional key challenges that we face. And so, kind of what I'm pointing out here is also informed by about 7,500 survey responses and 27 key informant interviews that was really led in part by CABI last year, but with support from other groups like Havos, the University of Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, and University of Minnesota. So kind of with that framing in mind, I want to introduce a project that, as Nicola mentioned, I've been leading for the past 3 years in collaboration with a number of other research organizations, and most importantly with 84 researchers around the world. And this is a project called Series 2030, Sustainable Solutions to End Hunger, and we launched the project in October of 2020 last year around World Food Day. And what the primary focus of this research program was, two very broad research questions, but really important ones for sort of donors and national governments who are interested in coalescing around Sustainable Development Goal number 2. So what are the most effective ways to end hunger and double the incomes of smallholders while protecting the climate? These are two sub-targets of SDG 2. And then the other is, what would it cost donors in particular to contribute to SDG 2? What's sort of needed from the policy community in order to end hunger as we know it by 2030? And so the process that this project went through was to kind of think about both the evidence and the cost modeling. And so we created 8 evidence syntheses using frameworks from Prisma and really kind of staying as close as we possibly could to systematic scoping review principles, informed by all of the research that's been done by the global community in this space over the past 20 years. But we created a cost model where we've got 14 modelable interventions and then a series of 10 recommendations for donors. This resulted in a focused collection on SDG 2 with Nature research journals. And I'm just putting this up here for the moment so that you can kind of see the titles of most of the evidence syntheses that were published across the journals in Nature research. So pretty broad overall in terms of their subject content. These are, again, primarily systematic scoping reviews. But we sort of broke them into 3 different categories of on the farm, empower the excluded, and then sort of the food on the move. All of this content is available in an open access collection on the Nature websites. But what is this, sort of the title of my talk, what does this have to do kind of with data science? So as I presented sort of some of the key challenges of what we need to face when it comes to agricultural evidence synthesis, these were things that were really sort of front and foremost in my mind when we started conceiving the project with our donors. So this idea of what does it take to really bring together agricultural data from both science databases and the gray literature, and then all of the problems that come with deduplication and normalization of results and things like that. But really, most importantly, what were the opportunities that we could sort of let data science solve on behalf of our researchers? Were there methods of classification of the results that would enable them to more quickly accelerate their review process? If we were labeling citations and extracting what we were able to see from those citations in certain ways, could we actually help pick up not only the pace of the review, but also what I think is more important than that is being really inclusive and representative in our overall data sets. And so we designed a data science and an AI model that was able to take in sort of the normal search results after conducting a search in the various aggregated databases and across different gray literature platforms. Could we bring all of that data together and then begin to process it, parse it, and understand it in ways that would help the researchers in their systematic reviews. So I'm not going to spend too much time going over the particulars here in the model. I did include the citation to the paper here for those who are, more interested in the computational framework. But there's two things that I want to sort of highlight about the model that I think were unexpected and kind of help us think about what the positive roles of AI and data science can be in an evidence synthesis going forward. So the first thing that it helped us do was by bringing together a large collection of gray literature and peer review literature just for exploration. At the beginning of this process, we were able to identify 84 researchers from 25 countries, and most of these individuals, we brought them together in different teams, again, geographers working with economists, working with social scientists, working with soil scientists. But most of these individuals were out of network for me and out of network for each other. So we really were able to bring together, a global distributed team of people to work on these specific topics. And, not to maybe overemphasize the point here, but many of these researchers were not necessarily publishing in kind of the peer review journals. So bringing together a large collection of gray literature helped us identify where we could, find really amazing scholarship in places that we wouldn't have found sort of if we were just looking at sort of top-cited researchers. So that was an important discovery for us. The second thing is that it enables us now that we've got a large collection of literature to really see kind of major gaps of evidence along the overall impact pathway. So similar to other evidence synthesis that have been conducted in agriculture, and I think it's true across other fields as well, is that we know that the overall end of the overall ending data set is relatively small to the beginning. But what we're able to see is that, overall there's not a lot of high impact literature about interventions that impact farmers. We have a lot of broader discussion literature or simulation literature, but not a lot of sort of on the ground, really key critical research. And we're able to see that across a much larger data set than we could otherwise without using the model. The other thing that is important to highlight, and this comes out in individual reviews too, it's just being able to see this at a broader scale, is that we do have limited data, really limited data about gender and about the cost of interventions. So many researchers are not really including the cost of interventions as part of their kind of original data sets. The other thing just to kind of mention here as I wrap up, since we're just, I'm just giving kind of a broad scan, is that there's additional use cases that we've used the model for now. One is another systematic scoping review that's just coming out now, how are farmers using digital services in low and middle income countries. But then for kind of newer use cases as well, where organizations like IFAD as well as USAID are interested in understanding what are their internal project reports saying about agricultural interventions. What do we know from those different sources of evidence that could be useful for sort of driving knowledge about where things are working, what's not working, and what gaps do we have? So I just want to point out that there's some other use cases that we can think of certainly for the role of data science and AI going forward. This is just another example of kind of in this particular work here, this agriculture in the digital age, thinking about opportunities to automate evidence gap maps using simple everyday tools like Google Spreadsheets and WordPress. And so this is something that we've recently designed, and here's the URL down here if you want to investigate it. But how can we, just build simple everyday tools and reproduce that code so that other researchers can make use of these things as they're doing their own research. So anyway, really happy to talk more about different use cases and sort of opportunities for coordination and collaboration as well. But with that, I will say thank you, and then I look forward to our discussion.
Thanks very much, Jaron. That was really interesting. And yeah, really good to know about some of those tools, and just to make people aware that there are actually lots of other tools as well that may not specifically be designed for agriculture, but they can be used for agriculture, and that's something we haven't really had chance to talk about today, but we can maybe talk about in the panel if you're interested. So Jaron, again, I think we'll just leave the questions until the panel discussion, if that's okay. I haven't got anything specific. I have had a question about slide sharing. This is being recorded and everything will be available on YouTube, but we can ask our speakers if they mind sharing their slides as well. So, so I can try and do that at the end for you. Obviously, it depends if anybody's got anything they, for any reason, didn't want to share specifically. So I will let you know. So our next speakers then, we have Sylvie Bruder and Jeff Volanek. I think Sylvie is speaking, but Sylvie and Jeff are both professors of agronomy at Purdue University, and they are going to be talking about initiatives for advancing evidence-based nutrient management in the US Midwest agroecosystems. And I should probably also say that both Sylvie and Jeff are heavily involved in the American Society for Agronomy. And I think, and apologies, Sylvie and Jeff, if I have this wrong, I think that Sylvie is currently the president-elect and Jeff is the president, but I may have that slightly wrong or slightly out of date. So do let me know if so. So welcome, Sylvie and Jeff.
Thank you, Nicola. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, okay. We can.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, you know, I think COVID-19 has done many things to our timelines, but I'm actually past president. I was president last year, and Jeff is currently president of the American Society of Agronomy. And that does fold into the efforts we've had. We both have a long history of being involved with our professional societies, and have thought quite a bit about the services that professional societies could or perhaps should be providing to advance evidence synthesis. I think the other relevant tidbits about both of us is that we're both extension specialists and we do field research and are expected to develop diagnostics and recommendations for nutrient management for ag crops here in the US. And additionally, we've both done long-term studies. I direct research activities at Purdue University's Water Quality Field Station, which is an in-field laboratory. It was established in 1992. It's got scads of data. The data itself were never thought to warrant funding, and hence the state of the data when I took over running the facility was not something anybody paid much attention to, even though there was general agreement that the data itself were of value. So that definitely plays into, okay, I can't advance. How do, let me go to the next. Okay, a little bit of trouble. All right. So, you know, I think it's no surprise we've heard people talk about this already, but in ag sciences, we field researchers, well, many of us applied basic researchers, we still do things the way we've always done them. I term it the small science, right? We do our own thing, we get our own money, we pursue our own research questions of interest, we publish the tidbits that are most interesting to us or we think will get the most notice, and we leave lots of unpublished data on the cutting room floor. Regardless, the field station is a great example of that. Only a small fraction of the data has been published. Again, my society hat, article data, even if you're extracting data from articles, much of it is still behind paywalls. So I think that's a huge issue. You know, the literature itself is fragmented. It's not transdisciplinary typically. But I think of most concern in this context is that the data, as already discussed with publication bias, is that what you're looking at in a journal is only partial. and therefore potentially highly biased. Certainly it's incomplete. And in general, there's lots of inaccessible and often lost data. Is it good data? Is it bad data? Who knows? But I can tell you from the field station, there's lots of data that's perfectly fine. It's just nobody's gotten around to analyzing it. I can't help but comment that, for a long time, there wasn't a lot of data enthusiasm, and then all of a sudden there's lots of enthusiasm for integrating data and doing things with it, cool swish things. But the reality is that ag researchers mostly inhabit that long tail. And when we think about science, we're not in the realm of working together with big data sets that are organized from the collection point and so therefore delivered as a nice package. We inhabit what my colleague in libraries calls the pile of bodies. That's all this unpublished dark data. And I will say, I think my personal perception is that that's especially true of those of us that work in extension where we may be doing confirmatory research. So this, great exciting notion that's come to be that we'll just pour lots of data into a data lake and somehow magic will happen and we'll have actionable insight is in many ways laughable at best if you look at the status of some of the data people like me collect. So, I hate to admit this, but Jeff and I have sort of been plugging away on this for 2 decades. But remember, we're data hobbyists. We have other jobs. We have our deliverables that we're supposed to do, which includes evidence-based diagnostics and things like that. But there hasn't been a whole lot of emphasis on it. So we've been plugging away, trying to improve the situation for literally a couple of decades. And so our strategy has been sort of an endless iteration of trying to create opportunities to gain resources, pushing and then turning around, proposing, building little things and then little bits of infrastructure and trying to demonstrate their utility. We were in on some of the first repository creation here at Purdue, but then demonstrating the value of that and, advocating with colleagues and then if about things they could be doing that would enhance our ability to synthesize evidence. And if they got excited about it, then we would turn around and see if we could collaborate with them. I think with our end goal of trying to improve the evidence basis for nutrient management, and I should have mentioned that, on my first slide, I showed that we had we've got these recommendations in place. We inherited, I inherited, Jeff did too, some historic recommendations and recommendation frameworks. And we start poking around, they don't fit, that's okay. But you can't even find the science underneath them. And so then you really start wondering, where do they fit? And so our effort is really focused on, can we surface data and both legacy and new, so we don't have to redo things where the data are still valid. And then also, what can we do to improve the primary literature, both the content and the bias, so that you can do the things you want to do with extracting the data that's in literature. We've had a strategy of looking at the low-hanging fruit first. What can we do that's cheap or help others do? And we're big on emulating and copying and not reinventing things. So we're always sort of snooping around looking for things. I want to just highlight a couple, 3 things maybe that are ongoing. And, in the spirit of what can you do with a little bit of change, back in 2013, we had a little bit of money left over and from a grant. And we were under certain constraints on how we could spend it. And one of the things we could do was have a workshop. And at that point in time, we didn't have any opportunities to apply for anything that involved using existing data for a research question, or even trying to build any infrastructure for data and its analysis, or use different tools, that kind of thing. So we convened a conference in the DC area. We thought we were being really clever because we thought we would get, funding agencies and policymakers and et cetera. It turned out workshop hit during a government shutdown, so it had its limitations, but we did get great attendance, and it did result in some of the things that we wanted to have happen. So in the Advocate Collaborate category, an individual attending was Paul Fixon, who was Director of Research for IP&I at the time and was overseeing distribution of the 4R Fertilizer Research Fund. And he got it into his head that what we needed to do was not fund individual studies, but start looking at coordinating things across similar types of studies. And he created an opportunity for those of us that run the type of facility I run, where you're looking at ag management impacts on water quality. And that in turn eventually allowed us to turn around and put a piggyback grant on top of that, funded by the federal government, that actually is not now focused on the current data that are being collected, but goes back in time to capture some of the legacy data. Another project, I can't claim it was a direct outcome of this conference, but we did try to keep pushing our agenda over and over again, and eventually there were opportunities for funding through the USDA that allowed us to get support for a project that looks on integrating public and private data for evidence-based recommendations. Just a quick screenshot of this is the knowledge base project, the aggregation of the drainage sites across the upper Midwest. We're at that IN1 over in Indiana. That's the Purdue Water Quality Field Station. But really our goals there are simply to recover what we can and develop a triage strategy for capturing the most high value stuff. Part of that triage strategy is to ask secondary users, what do you actually need out of this type of research? So we prioritize recovering the most important data, and we also modify current protocols to be the most useful. And then, we need to demonstrate the value so we can improve the resources coming to this sort of effort. Our FACT project, this is the Cyber Infrastructure Tools, which is trying to blend various streams of data. Again, this is really a case study type approach. We want to demonstrate that this kind of thing works and we should invest in it. And so we are trying to integrate disparate data sources and kind of shine a light on the problems associated with them. We have things in there about data models and systematic reviews and the value of open data, the value of using on-farm data. Lots of excitement here in the US for trying to use that on-farm data in research or with research to make recommendations site and soil specific. We do have a machine learning proof of concept because we are working with 40 or 50 terabytes of data from on-farm. Again, quickly, where are we in doing systematic reviews, or what are we focusing on? Well, we're really focusing on our own domain. We're focusing on nutrient management. We have one that's on fertilization and whether you can mitigate drought stress. That's the common thing that pops up in RECs. And in our FACT proposal, we're again focused on testing the components of existing recommendations in the upper Midwest. I would say the key problems won't surprise anybody when we try to extract stuff from the literature. Many reports don't give you what you need to know. They don't give you the right statistics. They don't necessarily even supply details on experimental design. Lots of stuff is missing. And so the third example is under the Advocate Collaborate, and that's with Deanna Osmond, who was also at that conference, took what she heard home, and she's been convening and engaging my counterparts all over the US in a data sharing effort to underpin a tool that she wants to develop. And one early product of that is that we have developed a manuscript that I think is about to go out for review on the minimum data that one ought to be collecting and publishing with this type of review. So again, back to our data bucket, where Jeff and I and our colleagues have focused is really going from researchers doing their own thing to just being logical and getting a common minimum array of relevant data in an orderly way, annotated appropriately, etc. And then others can do great stuff, but that's where we have focused. My final comments are on driving synthesis via the American Society of Agronomy or similar professional societies. I think have a big role in helping move this along as a service to their members. Agronomy and crops and soils here in the US, we have an array of journals that we publish, and we've been trying to have the society partner with entities like our own research repository, the National Ag Libraries and their research repository, link up with the CGIR on their ontologies, and then we've also tried to pull in private sector entities that are interested in developing open data resources for whatever reason. I think we've been twirling a lot of plates. It's hard to put any of these down, but I just thought I would put them up. These are all things we want to improve accessibility so that there's an equitable access issue, so that data can be used where it's needed. We do want to improve the infrastructure for systematic reviews. We want to make the primary literature better. We do want to be able to use some tools that require standard vocabularies, machine learning, etc. This issue of publishing null and confirmatory studies, Jeff and I have been talking about this with the societies for probably 8 years now, and I'm hoping we're beginning to make progress. This issue of data pubs, is that a solution for us, or other data service? And then honestly, if you're thinking about professional societies, there's an issue with sustainability. All right, I'm going to wrap up quickly and just throw up my concerns. There's plenty of vision, but there's tools issues, there's semantics, there's business models, publication bias, perceptions of value. Particularly for us, I know there's conventions and extension on the culture of how we go about doing things. We're still very independent. We still tend to skip the peer review if we're doing confirmatory research, and we got a lot of attitudes. So I'll close with that. This was a slip of paper that Jeff was handed when he was talking about the importance of data sharing and an extension setting with other specialists. And so not necessarily a particularly friendly willingness to share, but I think attitudes are changing. So that is what I have.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Sylvie. That's really good. And I love the little slip of paper at the end, which I guess incorporates some of the issues, at least with data sharing. Okay, so as before, we will move straight on because, again, we've gone a little bit over. So we're sticking now with the theme of trying to get information to the users. And we've got Dr. John Foote from AHDB, which is the Agricultural and Horticultural Development Board in the UK. And John is the Head of Environment and Resource Management and is going to talk about a new initiative, the Evidence for Farming Initiative. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you for that introduction, Nikki. And just to say that AHDB is a statutory levy board that is out to support the levy payers to become more sustainable and productive. So, why are we working on the Evidence for Farming Initiative, or EFI, as we've sort of called it? Well, we found from the Agricultural Productivity Working Group that farmers and growers are struggling to sort of meet market conditions because of, in the UK, the market is very fragmented, and we have, very small sectors when you look at the global market. And it's difficult for them to access, financial support, to access, what is really good innovation best practice for them. And they're also rather disconnected from the way that the consumer sees the product that they produce in the supermarket. And therefore, they're not getting the sort of signals from the consumer in terms of their preferences around sustainability or other drivers from the supply chain. And we know that we've got to move towards a world where food is more sustainable. We continue to deliver food that's affordable and that food supply is secure. but certainly government policy here in the UK is moving towards, driving other environmental benefits, be it clean air, clean water, and paying farmers to deliver on those sort of environmental improvements and benefits for society as a whole, rather than just focusing solely on food. So we've also exited the European Union, and this has changed the way that subsidies and market support is approached in the UK. And so we're going through an unprecedented amount of change here in the UK. So how will FE help farmers do this? Well, it's based on a what works principle. And this is a concept that's well embedded within the UK government circles, and is used, for example, by an organisation called NICE, which decides whether or not drugs here in the UK are effective, both in terms of do they work medically and are they cost effective, and that decides whether or not people get those drugs through the NHS. So we're looking at developing a centre that follows those what works principles, but also collaborates with other research organisations and bodies, such as Nicola's team at Harper Adams, Rothamsted, and pulls in both published and grey literature and the latest scientific innovation and data. We also want to pull in data from farmers themselves so that we can validate what's coming out of the research. So the approach we take is we start by reviewing the sort of primary evidence that's coming from academia, and we undertake what is known as a rapid evidence assessment, and we sort of look at the overall trends and direction of travel, and that information is then synthesized down into some sort of headings or sort of broad buckets of focus. We then work to translate that information and turn it into something that we can disseminate to farmers. And then we hope that the farmers, through accessing FE, will then implement that and then feed back what really works in the field. Now, the advantage of FE is not only does it help us start to pull together all that information, but it also starts to identify where we've got gaps for the research base, and so we can work with academia, the UK research funding organisations to say there's a gap in this particular topic and use that to direct time and money towards plugging that. We can also then use it for evidence-based policy development when we speak to government, because we have a role in providing that evidence through to government so that they can then start to make decisions. And as we've said, farmers and growers can also use the evidence to make more informed decisions. So at a farmer level, it's very much about, how can I do something? Does it work well in my situation? And how can I go about doing it on my farm? Now, we're building FE at the moment to focus very much on net zero, because that's where the demand and the interest is in particular at the moment within the sustainability journey. But also in 2019, the National Farmers Union published a rather useful document around how the industry as a whole could move towards net zero, setting targets to achieve that by 2040. And within that, it's set 3 pillars of focus for farmers and policymakers. And so pillar 1 is about boosting productivity, so that per unit of product, the amount of carbon associated with that reduces, and it also helps produce greater and more sustainable incomes for farmers. Pillar 2 looks about how can we store or sequester carbon within the environment here in the UK. And pillar 3 looks at, how can we embed and utilize greater renewable energy and bioenergy sort of crops on farmland. So we thought, well, that's a nicely, bound, scoped piece of work that we can use to underpin what we're doing for FE. And so we're very much focused on that net zero and delivering net zero for UK agriculture. So how could a farmer access the system? And so we've looked at, a number of approaches, and the one that seems to be getting a lot of sort of interest from farmers when we've trialed it is this decision tree. And this is not our decision tree. We've borrowed it from a Nature paper. But, basically the idea is that, the farmer says, well, have I got, a peaty soil that's very wet, needs to be drained? No, I move down the list. Have I got severe nutrient deficiency? No, I move down the list. Have I got extensive bare fallow? Yes, then maybe I should look at growing cover crops. And the advantage of this method is that it guides the farmer through the decision making and then takes them through to the evidence, but very much avoids the sort of, well, I heard this down the pub with my mate. It sounds really interesting, and going right down to the very bottom of the decision tree where they look at residue crops or some other sort of approach that may not deliver the same benefits, but may come with higher costs or complexity to deliver. So it's very much, presenting the information in that way. And then we're also looking at, the TripAdvisor approach. Can we, using filters, enable farmers and growers to select the cost, how strong the evidence is and the sort of time it takes to deliver. And that approach is also favored by some. So I suspect we'll end up with a model that enables farmers to get to the information using one or two of these methods, maybe even a third, and we're about to trial that. So what we've done is we've undertaken some rapid evidence assessments, and we've started to look at a range of options across the 6 sectors that AHDB supports. And here is some of the information that's come out of those rapid evidence assessments. And we've developed the evidence standards that sit behind this table. So it looks simple, but it's not to deliver. And we've then looked at, so what is the practice? So we can lower age at first calving, and we look at the potential outcomes that may deliver, along with cost, effectiveness, how well does it work? Some things don't work particularly well, or the jury's out. And so we show that. We give an indication of speed of change, which is a new rating that we've put in, because some things may take many more years than, fitting, for example, LED lighting in your barn. And we also then give an indication of strength of evidence based on, is it 1 or 2 studies? Is it, decent replicated studies that have been repeated in numerous locations across the country, and there is real data from the field that shows that it works? And that may increase the uptake and desirability of those approaches. We've been working hard to break the standards, and we did that in the early stages. So we initially came up by looking at, cost-benefit analysis, and we discovered we couldn't get the data. So what we've ended up doing is going down a sort of very broad brush approach, where a £1 symbol says, I've got a tractor, I've got the seeds, I can go and put, cover crops in, and it's not too hard. It may be for £2, I need to do a bit of training, but I've still got the tractor, the diesel and the seeds. So it's okay, right up to 5, where in fact you're looking at major infrastructure change, or if you're looking at growing crops on the land, you've planted trees and therefore you've lost the utility of that land. So we've given some relative figures where that's been required, and we've also discovered that, for example, if we were talking about renewable energy on farm, that's too high a level to think about. Same with genomics. You need to sort of drill down to the individual techniques. So I could fit LED lighting, I could put heat pumps in, I could put, solar PV, and that gives you the ability to sort of rate the information and find the information in the scientific literature. So just imagine that, a farmer has come to this dashboard either through the decision tree or they've used the filters, and they're interested in lowering age at first calving. Well, they can then click on that, and they can then get some very simple but consistent information about what is the practice, how effective is it. And we really have boiled down all the literature and really tried to turn it into very simple and accessible information. We also then go about talking about where can it work, and in some cases, for example, for some of the cropping systems, it may be that we have to say that on certain soils it's not suitable. In this particular system, we talk about, closed herds and sort of block calving, etc. We give some indication of cost, return on investment, and farmers have also said to us that they want us to talk about what is the opportunity cost. What is the opportunity for them to make money rather than just cost, because that would be an interesting sort of element, and we're looking at how we can build that into the system. We then give them a bit of a how-to guide, and we then sort of give them access to further information. Now, at the moment, we're directing them to AHDB information, but longer term, we want to be in a position to take them through to sort of videos, the Institute of Agriculture and Horticulture that we're developing here in the UK, and a whole range of resources to suit different learning styles and needs. Now, at the moment, this is very much one side of the coin. It's the side that gives the information, presents the evidence to farmers, and hopefully drives uptake and the use of innovative techniques, which we know is lagging here in the UK compared to some of our international peers. But we also need to find a way of capturing data, and we're doing work on that at the moment, so that as farmers undertake, trials or use some of these techniques, they can almost give feedback, again, very much like the TripAdvisor type approach, and we need to find some way of validating that information and making sure that we're not corrupting the quality of information that we're providing through to sort of farmers and growers. So next steps. Well, we're building some prototype front ends to sort of then test with farmers and growers. We've done some limited testing, and that's informed the approach that we've taken. For example, the table you saw earlier. And we're looking at how we can then develop that further and test it before going out to a more formal consultation with all of the farmers and growers across the UK, along with the scientific community and other partners, to understand whether or not we've got flaws in this approach or whether or not it's overall supported, and we should then look to scale it up. We will be building a business case to scale up this project and working with partners to establish a scientific committee and those partnerships to make sure that we can then get rid of the fragmentation and sort of work together to sort of have almost one source of the truth to support farmers and growers here in the UK. We're also exploring the use of AI, and this has been touched on by a number of speakers, but we're looking at it from 2 points of view. One, can it be used to sort of collect the data from farmers and use that to provide useful insights and build more information in that is of greater value to farmers and growers and to the industry as a whole. And the other side is that to undertake rapid evidence assessments and to churn the handle of what we want to do is quite expensive, even just for net zero, but we want to scale this up to cover absolutely everything that applies to UK agriculture. And so we need to find a way of making this pretty cost effective. And can we use AI to do some of the trawling of grey literature, some of the scientific literature, to sort of pull that information together? We think that we're still going to need the human to sort of review that, to do the translation and turn it into plain English. But in future years, that AI may be able to do that with some checks. We still think that you're going to need to have the human to say, these are the questions we want you to answer. So almost the sort of the word search, the key sort of words that are used to sort of launch the AI, and then to sense check what comes out the back end. So we've got a small pilot just trialing that at the moment, and we'll see where that goes. And as I've said, data from users. How can we get that data in and validate it? So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, John. Really interesting and a really useful initiative. So I have got one question, but I'm going to put it forward to the panel if that's okay, because again, we're over time. So, so we're going to stick again with this theme of use of evidence, but we're actually going to hear from Stuart Kirk now, who's going to be talking about the user's perspective for knowledge synthesis to inform policy and practice. So Stuart's the lead scientist for water management in the research analysis and evaluation team of the Environment Agency. He's also worked for the European Scientific Advice Mechanism as a policy officer, as an expert policy officer. So he's got the perspective of using it from a European and a national point of view. So welcome, Stuart.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the intro. Can everybody hear me and see the slides okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, that's great. Okay, as Nicola was saying, I'm really coming this from the user's perspective because I work for the last 10 years. I've been working at very much a science policy interface, but let me just explain what that means. That means I've largely been working in science teams embedded in either government departments or the government's agencies, such as the Environment Agency, or in the European Commission, where we've been looking at either setting new policies or reviewing the effectiveness of existing policies, or indeed policies and practice. And that has extended to working at the European Commission, doing very, very high level advice directly to the College of Commissioners, and much smaller scales of application as well. And during that time, I've been a strong advocate of formal methods of reviews and worked with Nicola and others in the past. So we've got a good track record of that. And all the time, really trying to be an honest broker. I'm working with scientists, interfacing with policymakers, and I'm often the people that you would come across who's actually commissioning the work. So I'm kind of an intermediary. And what I'm going to share today is some of the experience focusing on how to get the most impact from the great work that is done under these evidence reviews. So I know we've only got a short time, so I will go quite swiftly through 5 areas: users' needs, choices of evidence review methods, old and new questions which are now emerging, a blended model of doing evidence reviews I want to controversially share with you, and then finally some top tips for impact. So without further ado, the user's needs. So from a policymaker's perspective, we really do need the type of evidence reviews that you're all working on. They need to be robust and transparent. They need to be as comprehensive as possible, obviously. And I think what I really want to stress here is the importance of the transparency as much as the robustness. We're very often working on quite controversial issues, agriculture and the environment, mostly in my case, and we're often challenged. And some of the challenges will go something like this: I don't like the evidence that you've put forward, so I'm going to reject your report and go and commission my own report. And to be able to rebuff that challenge, you have to have a method which you can say, well, that's very well if you do, but what you're going to have to do has to be at least to the method which we've produced it, at which point the challenge is often declined. So it really does need to be robust. And we've shown the picture there as a glass box to get away from the idea of producing from the literature results which appear to come out of a black box. So it's a transparent box rather than a black box, and we have to be open about that and allow other people to pick it through. So the transparency is very important. The other reason why things have to be really robust is we're dealing very much in real world impacts here. The type of advice we can give can very much affect farmers' lives, incomes, businesses, and wider societal impact when we think about we're dealing with pollution and the like as well. So moving quickly on, choice of method used. Now I won't dwell long on this because I know you've had a previous meeting on this topic. I will mention the Eclipse report for anybody working on the more ecological end of impacts from farming, as it were. The Eclipse report did a fantastic review of all the different methods that are available, and I'll be touching on some of those a little later. So this next slide shows the range of methods as described in the Eclipse report, which was a European Horizon 2020 report. I should mention, produced for the Commission. So this shows the range of reviews, and we have the age-old problem. In policy development or assessment of policy and effectiveness of practice, we're often up against very tight time scales. So we've got a time restriction, but we want to have robust answers. The cost of doing the more detailed reviews goes up, but probably the biggest factor is the time they take. So we're very often faced with the challenge that you've only got 3 months, Mr. Kirk, to help produce this evidence review. Therefore, it's going to have to be a literature review or a quick scoping review. And the point I want to mention here is we should not select the method against the time available. You recommend the method that is proportionate to the importance of the decision, or conversely, the risk of making an incorrect decision. And if a policymaker decides that they will push ahead and only do a literature review in the time that's available rather than something more formal, then that is has got to be cautioned, heavily cautioned, and made clear that I will only give you a partial answer. So what we very often do in my type of role is we very often broker the idea that, okay, you start off with something like a quick scoping review, which is a bit more formal, with a view to going on to a fuller, more formal type of review based on the findings of that. And that's often a compromise we come across and is acceptable. Moving on to the types of questions that we're dealing with. So I know some of you are dealing more with production. My line of work, I'm often dealing with environmental impacts of farming. But even within the latter, the type of questions we're getting are changing an awful lot. And we're looking at the shift from quite specific questions on will this farming method increase my say nitrogen nitrate leaching to groundwater, for example, to much broader questions. And those are more of the nature of sustainable land management and sustainable agriculture. So we're now being asked far more questions around how is farming, what does it deliver in terms of ecosystem services, natural capital, how do we cost that and apply that and fit that into our agricultural modelling. Overall, wider sustainability issues. What does a sustainable rural landscape with agricultural actually look like, and what is the right balance? So we get straight into those more interdisciplinary questions that some of the other speakers have mentioned. They may be quite interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, and often involving consideration of transition to more sustainable forms of land management. So the nature of them has definitely changed, particularly in the UK recently, where we've got a new agricultural bill, new environment bill, and we have left the European Union's system of working under the Common Agricultural Policy, and there's a big opportunity to reassess the way we do our farming and subsidise and support farms based on different principles going forward. The other item I wanted to introduce to you was this idea of a blended model. When I say blended model, that's a blended approach to how we do evidence reviews. And again, I put the picture up there for the Eclipse model, and the blended model I will just take you through now has really been developed between a small number of us working in the science advisory mechanism, which is the highest level of scientific policy, science advice for policy in the Commission, where that advice is given directly to the College of Commissioners. The way in which that is done is the European Commission has a group of several scientific advisors. This slide's slightly out of date, a couple of people have changed that. And this is the group I was working as a seconded national expert in for about 3 years in Brussels. And their way of functioning is to try to provide scientific advice on some of the major societal challenges that the College of Commissioners have asked them to address. In some cases, the chief scientific advisors will raise issues of their own, which also need to be subject to a lot of evidence review to come up with practical considerations to encourage the Commission to think about some other topics which isn't currently in the frame of concern. And the models that are used are a mixture of detailed scientific reviews, working with broader consultations, and iterating the development of scientific advice. And the way that works in practice is we very often started out spending a lot of time defining the question in more detail. So we'd actually do a quick scoping review on the actual form of the question. So maybe 3 months work, working with stakeholders, trying to understand, is this exactly the right question? And is it amenable to some form of formal evidence review? The work was then often given out to the group of European academies, a consortium called SAPEA, Scientific Advice for Policy by European Academies, who put together a very detailed scientific review based upon literature review and some expert consultation. There is an iterative process throughout that whereby literature review will inform a workshop. Workshops will then go back and inform the literature review. There may be separate meetings with more focused experts and indeed more focused literature reviews on particular points of interest. So you end up with quite an iterative model whereby you're mixing between literature, expert elicitation, including workshops and questionnaires, then back to doing some focused literature, and then sounding board panels where you have initial results going forward, then some more gap filling. And we worked with the Eclipse team in reviewing these methods, who were very complimentary about that. And it's very much about making the full use of the science resources available to us, both through the European academies and through the Joint Research Centre, because the Commission has a wide range of expertise open to it, in addition to what we can find in the literature. The results were very good. This blending of literature and expert elicitation and iterating between the two produced a wide range of reports on different topics. Only some of them involved agriculture, but where they did, they seem to work very well. And then finally, I'm going to take you on to some top tips for impact. Having spent about 10 years on different forms of review, working with different groups, here's probably my 3 top tips, I think. Some people have already alluded to the importance of a logic model or a framework. I've used a different term in this case, which is conceptual model. And I just wanted to emphasize the importance of, when you're starting this work, to really do thrash out that logic model framework or conceptual model. In some cases, it works well if you do it diagrammatically, as in this case shown here, where we're showing leakage from slurry storage into groundwater pathways, and therefore tracking back how pollution can track both across surface waters and through groundwaters to a particular point. And by developing a conceptual model or a logic model at the very earliest stage, this helps to give confidence that you have actually got not just the right question, but everybody really does understand the boundaries to that question and what you're getting. And the advantage of having good conceptual models worked up graphically as well is when you come to your results at the end of the day, you've actually got something which you can also use as to disseminate the results. The next item, don't worry about the detail, it was just to show that there have been various attempts at incorporating uncertainty. And yep, the recommendation is if there is any way you can sensibly put certainty or uncertainty statements into particularly the final concluding remarks for an evidence review, that is seen as extremely valuable, particularly for the policymaker, whoever's reviewing policy or effectiveness of practice. This is really what people would like, and it should be really applied more often, because it is very powerful. When we've spoken and interviewed ministers, for example, they've come back and told us that's the one thing they would like, and the standard way of doing uncertainty across the different areas they have to deal with within their portfolios of work. And the last one, I'm sure you will produce superb studies, and I've been involved in commissioning a lot of them, but there is always a danger that those superb studies are going to sit on a shelf. To really make sure you're going to have impact, I'd strongly recommend investing a little bit of time into things like these infographics, like the conceptual models. If you spend less than 1% of your budget, I can guarantee you'll get well over 100% increase in impact by making your valuable findings available in readily communicable ways. Will have a much greater impact. This includes use of videos as well, cartoons, but the basic infographics, as this one is produced by Maury, is a good example to start with. So I think I'll leave that there. Thank you very much. Look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stuart. That was a really useful ending to the presentation, the series of presentations. So we have basically gone through looking at the picture of where we are now, looking at some innovations, and looked at some problems and looked at actual use of evidence. So we have got about 10 minutes, or just over 10 minutes, for a discussion. I just want to thank all of our panel members before we go into that, just in case we get cut off at the end, because I'm not quite sure how it works. So a really big thank you to all of you, in case I don't get a chance to say that at the end. So question-wise, now we have a specific question from, oh yes, the panel members might want to put their webcams back on so the other people can see us. I shall do the same. So we have a question about FE, very specific. So for John, just quickly, we have a question about whether you plan to expand FE, for example, to integrate biodiversity management and agroecology.
So we are looking to expand FE to cover most of the sort of other issues, but there is already quite a good evidence centre for conservation ecology here in the UK. And in fact, one of my team was involved in the setting up and development of that, which is really useful because it gives us that expertise. So we would look in that case, rather than replicate what they've already done, is just to link through to their resources and enable farmers to use it. And maybe support with updating of some of that content.
Okay, lovely, thank you very much. And I thought it might be useful as well just to come back to the very first question that we had, which was about applying evidence to enhance agriculture in Africa. So the question was specifically in Africa, but I think this idea of applying evidence and perhaps enabling us to apply evidence to improve agricultural production in all parts of the world is really important. And I wonder if any of the panel members have got any advice on that. So we've got Solange, who's working in Africa, but we've also got Stuart, for example, who's very experienced in working with users, and Jaron, who's worked on a multidisciplinary. Sylvie, in fact, all of you are experienced in some way. So is there anybody who would like to say something about that? Shall I pick on somebody?
I guess I would say from a society perspective, and in terms of scholarly communication and access to evidence, I mean, I think that's open science is becoming a best practice. We've been slow to adopt it in some corners, but certainly the value to solving problems of being fast and open has been demonstrated by what's happened with COVID. And it's a good lesson for us all to take to heart, to think about how we make sure that that research on can be accessed and used in a way to examine in different contexts the effectiveness of a practice wherever you are in the world. And so it shouldn't be behind paywalls. And that's my personal opinion, but that is a challenge for us in scholarship right now.
Yeah.
Nicola, this is Jeff. I'll follow up on Sylvie's comment, only to say that part of our professional organization, the American Society of Agronomy, includes 14,000 certified crop advisors. So we have this network of professionals who can take our evidence-based practices to scale in the US. across the country, across North America. So that is also another piece to achieve what you just asked.
Lovely, thank you. So not having paywalls, thinking about advisors. Jaron, I think you were going to say something as well.
Yeah, I think just to come in on this, and Stuart, you highlighted this in your comments as well, but just being sure that we're mindful of what the policy process looks like in different contexts, right? So thinking about who our implementation partners are on the ground in various, in various economies, in various countries, is really important. And so I don't know that, there's any way around thinking about how we repackage and retranslate the information that we've created for different contexts. I don't think there's a silver bullet to that problem yet. And all of the speakers today have kind of highlighted the importance of continued personal relationships and the human face to bringing evidence forward and to light. So I think just always walking back to what's the policy calendar, and then who are our contacts in various places that can make the relevant for their own needs is really important.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Jaron. Stuart, yeah.
If I may, unfortunately, a lot of stuff with agriculture does get quite political, and the bodies of evidence that are available do reflect the amount of investment from different established forms of agriculture, and we have to be very careful when we're reviewing evidence, whether there's eco-agriculture, agroecology, whatever you want to call it, only received a tiny fraction of the funding that mainstream traditional agricultural has. So I would just a word of caution there about balancing and being fair in terms of what information is coming is based on previous funding support.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Stuart. And I did notice in the webinar, we also have somebody who works at the Africa Centre for Evidence, and they've been fantastic at creating a network throughout Africa. Unfortunately, I don't think we can speak to people that aren't part of the panel to find out a bit more, but Solange, I don't know if you've come across the Africa Centre for Evidence as well, as whether there's anything you know about it at all.
Yes, thanks. So we do some work with them and participate in some of their activities that go on in the region, but the focus of their reviews tends to be more on the social development and agricultural side, so it's slightly different from our focus of health. But we know them, and we sometimes collaborate with them and present webinars for each other, things of that sort. But they do similar work than we do in terms of doing evidence synthesis for their work across countries in Africa, including not South Africa only, but Malawi, I believe, and Kenya, and also in disseminating evidence from the reviews that are done. I don't know if Celeste or Anel have anything to add.
Yeah, no, sorry, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll move on actually, because I've only got a couple of minutes left anyway. I just want to say very quickly, I think that networking is just so important, and that's what Africa Centre for Evidence has been really good with. And that's what I'd really like, for us as an agricultural evidence community to really think about networking and how we can do that better as well. I've got another question, which is, do the panel members also engage with agriculture colleges to support lecture design and updates for future farmers? So some of us are working in agriculture colleges. So Sylvie, Jaron and myself all work within agricultural education institutions, and we certainly work with those interfaces. But from my personal point of view, I also work with most of you here in different ways as well, so with policy and people that are dealing with farmers and things as well. So I think that's an important question. It's something we do, but do we do enough? Sylvie, I can see you.
Well, yes, I'm smiling because I think it's, it has been, different entities have different philosophies about how they design curriculum, but here, you know, it tends to be the faculty of a department or whatever own the curriculum. So you have to get the faculty to understand the importance of the change that's needed and invest in developing, you know, new curriculum, and that tends to lag, unfortunately, and you know, I think the best input we can get is when we go to the employers of our students and they say, your students need to be able to do X, they need to be able to do, and so we've been getting now finally the feedback we need on, they need data skills, they need, you know, various statistical skills, they need to be able to synthesize, that kind of thing, and that is beginning to drive change in the curriculum.
Yes, good. Well, that's good. Celeste, now you didn't get a chance to speak during the speeches. Is there anything, and I cut so much off because I wanted to move on just now. We've still got about 2 minutes left. I don't know if there's anything else either of you want to add from the discussions or the presentations that you think is maybe worth saying at all.
Thanks, Nicola. Perhaps I can just add, you know, I think much of what's been said is something that, you know, working within the health synthesis environment, the health research synthesis environment is you know, so many issues we can relate to. And I think there are, for example, institutionalization of this sort of change in how people view evidence and how evidence can be used in policy. And I must say, I really, a lot of what Stuart said resonated with me, because we face similar processes in incorporating health evidence into health policy decisions, and you know, the different policy cycles and the timing thereof, and how do you actually generate impact, and making sure that what you produce is actually meeting the needs of the user. And I think there's often a bit of a mismatch there, and that's why I think that sort of role that somebody like Stuart plays is so important. Just linking to what Solange said about the Africa Centre, I think they have demonstrated a real sort of you know, ability to create a multi-sectoral evidence synthesis sort of network and initiative. And our linkages with them have been a lot about capacity building, because in Africa specifically, there's, you know, there's a lack of capacity, and there's so many challenges. And so I think there's it sort of speaks to what you also mentioned around capacity development. So I think, you know, we sort of are all facing similar challenges, and I think finding those synergies and being able to dovetail as we move forward is really going to, you know, be sort of the way we need to work in the future.
Thank you very much for that. So actually we are out of time. So thank you again to all the panel members. I really appreciate you all giving up your time, and I hope, you know, today's maybe another step on the way to our capacity building. And thank you to everybody who's listened. I hope you found it useful. As I've said before, please do contact me or any of the panel members, of course, if you have any questions, or I can put you on to other people. But likewise, if you're interested in perhaps, you know, becoming part of a broader agricultural network, because that's something that we are trying to move forward. And yeah, thanks very much, everybody. All the very best.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you to Nicola for chairing that great session, and to all of our presenters. I would like to invite you to join us for the May webinar. So registration is now open on our website, and that will be about qualitative evidence synthesis, using qualitative evidence to inform decision making, and that'll be May 11th, 2021. So thank you all. This session will be recorded if you'd like to rewatch, and if you have any questions, please do get in touch with us. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.